Hello, this is Michael McDonald, and a lot of clients initially come to me with some version of the belief that they're overwhelmed because they have too much to do, too many problems, they have too many options, and it's stressing them out. And a distinction that I've started using recently to help them piece this apart and create more sanity and clarity is the difference between overwhelm and overload. So here, at least, what I refer to as overload is structural, and overwhelm is a feeling. So overload, at a practical level, is where the demand is greater than the capacity. The time, the energy, the money, like it doesn't line up. The pegs don't fit into the holes. There's not enough boxes to fit everything in. And overwhelm is that spinning feeling, that worrying, jumping from one thing to the next, and this feeling of like, oh my God, the world is so complex. This is such a difficult problem. But really, the nature of overwhelm is what you feel when you're trying to focus on more than one thing at a time. No matter how complex your situation is, when you're focusing on just one thing at a time, you don't feel overwhelmed. So innocently, it can often look like overload leads to overwhelm, but this starts to fall apart when you really pay attention. Because it's possible to feel totally overwhelmed even when the practical level, even when there's plenty of capacity, when that's fine, when you're not overloaded. And you can be extremely overloaded and yet at the same time feel totally at peace. The situation is not causing the feeling. And the downward spiral here that I want to help you avoid is not to confuse the two. Don't try to change how you feel by changing the structure, going into fixing things as if that's going to make you feel better, as if resolving the overload is going to resolve the overwhelm. That's not actually how it works. And not trying to change the structure based on how you feel, which is even less practical. It's usually just you worrying and wasting your energy and not taking any practical action. And it's not going to address the overload. It's just going to feel horrible. And I mean, sometimes these will work to a degree, but they feel bad and they strangle our creativity. We don't have as much access to intelligently address the situation. There's much more sanity and effectiveness when you address overwhelm and overload separately. So overload can be addressed structurally. That's where you can get creative, approach it like a puzzle from a distance, like, oh, there's not enough time to do that. Okay, let's see what's possible. Let's move things around. Let's try things. Note that there isn't a need to feel tragic about it. And indeed, if you did, you wouldn't have as much access to intelligence and creativity in addressing overload. And when you're feeling overwhelm, notice that the source of that overwhelm is not from the situation. It's from how you're thinking in the moment. So to address overwhelm, I recommend levity, not taking your thinking so seriously, allowing your thinking to settle down. The key to overcoming overwhelm is to not overthink it. In those times where you're tempted to think even harder about that problem, as if you had to solve the problem in order to feel bad, but it's the thinking about the problem, which is actually really stressing you out, allow your thinking to settle down. And when you go both these directions, when you have levity, when you allow your thoughts to settle, that will address both overwhelm and overload. So remember, next time that you think you're overwhelmed because you're overloaded, remember to separate these out. Ask yourself, is this really the issue that I'm overwhelmed or that I'm overloaded?